What's going on? It's Suk and I'm back with a brand new video on Super Duper Tech. Now in today's video I shall be showing you what it's like to play games on the brand new 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. As always, the specs for the model that I'm using in this video are below in the description. Now this is the model with the 10th generation Intel processor. I will also have the maximum spec model on the channel within the up and coming weeks. Also stay tuned to the very end to see if there are any differences between playing on Windows 10 via Boot Camp or straight through macOS. Finally, we are on the road to 5,000 subscribers, and if you are new around here, then I must ask you to hit the subscribe button, clicking the bell to be notified of when I upload any of my new videos. But without any further ado, let's hit the titles. So first up, let's talk about gaming on this machine with Windows 10. Now the games I played here were GTA 5, Call of Duty Black Ops 4, Fortnite, Battlefield 5, Apex Legends, Minecraft, CSGO, and finally League of Legends. So I tested all these games at high graphical settings, as this would give us room for improvement by lowering the details. Now starting off with this MacBook Pro's native resolution of 2560 by 1600, and as you would expect for a machine without a GPU, the frame rates were fairly poor. Though when compared to the entry model with its 8th generation Intel i5 processor, at least Battlefield 5 was able to run. However, the frame rates were not anything to sing and dance about, with it averaging around 7 frames per second. League of Legends by far performed the best here, averaging 112 frames per second, while Apex Legends and Fortnite, along with Battlefield, were the bottom 3 performing games, which could not even eclipse an average of 20 frames per second. And when playing at this resolution and these graphical settings, GTA 5 and CSGO performed very similarly, which is a trend you'll see throughout this video. League of Legends, Minecraft and Call of Duty Black Ops 4 were amongst the 3 best performing games, although the differences between these games on average was pretty big, with League of Legends coming in with 112 frames per second, dropping to an average of 37 frames per second when playing Black Ops 4. Due to this, it was clear that playing at native resolution was going to be a challenge for this machine. Therefore, I chose to lower the resolution to Full HD at the 16:10 aspect ratio to 1920 by 1200. At this resolution, Minecraft bizarrely got the same average frame rate as League of Legends in the previous test, now averaging 112 frames per second. While at this resolution, League of Legends also increased its average by an additional 32 frames per second, increasing from 112 frames per second to 144 FPS. Though you have to remember that due to the refresh rate of the display being capped to 60Hz, that you won't actually see or feel anything above 60 frames per second. Also at this resolution, these same 3 games performed the worst again, though their average frame rate increased by almost 30 to 40% at times, though even then 10 frames per second on average when playing Battlefield was straight up nasty. Now when lowering the graphical details, of course you can expect an additional increase in frame rate in the region of up to around 25%, though even then 12 frames per second or even 13, 14 or even 15 frames per second is still pretty bad. Of course, for a machine without a GPU, it could be forgiven for this level of performance, but you've got to keep in mind that this machine retails for around £1,799. Yes, you could get better frame rates on a gaming laptop for a fraction of the price of this machine, but once again you've got to remember that this machine is not designed to play any of these titles, or any games for that matter, of course unless they're Apple's own arcade games. Also, GTA 5 and CSGO continue their trend of performing very similarly, with both of them averaging 40 frames per second. So finally, I lowered the resolution down to standard HD at this 16:10 aspect ratio to a resolution of 1280 by 800. Now things here were very interesting. Firstly, Battlefield 5 stands out once again for being the worst performing game, now averaging 16 frames per second. So though Battlefield Battlefield 5 was one of the, well, let's call it for what it is, it was the worst performing game out of the bunch. It, along with GTA 5 and Fortnite, were actually one of the most consistent games, with their minimum and maximum frame rates not being so different. Now this of course means that you won't run into too many issues where you face random frame rate drops out of nowhere, unlike League of Legends and Minecraft, which of course were the top two best performing games, though they were pretty much the most inconsistent games tested. But due to the screen not being able to display anything higher than 60 frames per second, when playing a game like Minecraft and averaging over 140 frames per second and then dropping right the way down to 132 frames per second, you'll never feel it. But to be honest with you all, it's not too shabby when you lower the details, as games like Black Ops 4 and GTA 5 then don't drop below 60 frames per second and of course feel fairly stable. I'm sure you all are doing exactly what I'm doing in my head, and you want to see which games at what resolution and what graphical settings can actually perform better than most other games consoles. At least then you're able to say that you're able to have a MacBook and it's actually quite formidable to game, and it's actually quite comparable to a console. Now, keeping in mind that a console will be playing these games at full HD, and of course the new generation of consoles coming out very soon will actually be able to play these games at 4K. But nevertheless, if you took a look at the performance at standard HD, there was only 3 games that could not eclipse 60 frames per second, that being Battlefield 5, Apex Legends and Fortnite. And I know I've already made this point earlier on in the video, but of course you've gotta expect that for a machine that has not got a GPU, that the frame rates are gonna be quite poor. I mean, adjust your expectation, and trust me, this machine isn't too bad when you factor these things in. Of course, cooling aside, you'd want better battery life and all these other things, but on most gaming machines, they haven't got the best battery life either. So to be fair, it's not even that bad. But hey, with the majority of these heavier graphically intense games, they're actually only available on Windows, as of course they utilize the DirectX graphics capabilities, whereas on macOS it uses Metal. Now with that being said, I'm going to change up the selection of games, as here we have Fortnite, CSGO, League of Legends and finally Minecraft. The same again here, starting off with the native resolution and high graphic settings. Now this sees League of Legends once again with the highest frame rate on average with 73 frames per second. Now at this resolution it was very playable, which is something you don't normally hear me saying when playing games on a MacBook that doesn't have a GPU. Let alone the fact that we are playing this on macOS using Metal as opposed to Windows 10 using DirectX. Also at this resolution, Minecraft came in so close to an average of almost 60 frames per second, which is great to see, though its frame rate was lower when compared to its performance when playing through Windows 10. However, when running on macOS, this frame rate was much more consistent. But once again, the screen on this MacBook Pro is capped at 60Hz. Perhaps the time is approaching soon where we may see ProMotion high refresh rate displays on Macs at some point in the future. Lowering the resolution as we did before to 1920 by 1200 sees Minecraft now average 90 frames per second. League of Legends was once again at this resolution quite enjoyable, averaging close to 100 frames per second, but we barely see an increase in performance when playing Fortnite, which already did not perform breathtakingly through Windows 10. In fact, the increase in performance we see here through macOS was an additional measly 1 frame per second. CSGO was improving throughout, coming in with almost 80 frames per second when playing at 1280 by 800, which is an additional 14 frames on top of what we saw playing the same game on Windows 10. But perhaps the biggest shock throughout this was Fortnite, which on this hardware, regardless of if it was played on macOS or Windows, was one of the worst performing games period. While playing on Windows 10, we saw its average frame rate increase from 16 to 39 frames per second, whereas when this same game was played on macOS, this performance increase was a lot less, from 17 to 26 frames per second, when the resolution was lowered down from native resolution to 1280 by 800, and even then the improvement really wasn't that noticeable. It's quite interesting to see that you could play games on macOS and get frame rates similar to, and in a few cases exceed what you could get in Windows, but the sheer amount of different games that you have access to on Windows 10 is vastly superior. Besides, with Apple transitioning the Mac to their own silicon, you will no longer be able to boot camp and dual boot a Mac into Windows to allow for games to be played. The only way that you would be able to do that is if the operating system was emulated through something like Parallels, which remains to be seen, but you know I got you covered when those eventually get released. But what's stopping Apple from making their own GPUs and dropping AMD? Just food for thought. I still stand by it that if you are looking to play games, then Windows is of course going to be the platform that you want, especially if it's purely for gaming. As most of you know, do not buy a MacBook for gaming unless it's maybe the 16-inch model, but like I said, you'd be able to get so much more for your money with a dedicated gaming laptop for around £2,000. In fact, let's be real, probably half that price. But hey, if it's the odd game here or there and they're very light, casual, slightly older games, then to be fair, you could possibly get away with, playing those games on this MacBook Pro, providing the graphics details was lowered. So that will be all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are new around here, then be sure to subscribe, clicking the bell icon to be notified of when I upload any of my new videos. If you have got any questions with anything you've seen in this video, then be sure to leave them down below in the comment section, or alternatively, hit me up on my social media, links to which can of course be found down below in the video description. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.